Today I'm joined by the Managing Director of Kairos, Mr. Razaq Ahmed. Welcome to the Global Business Report.
Thank you for having me here.
So let's start with the new CBN regulations on the fintech sector. Now, the minimum shareholder requirements range from $275,000 to as much as $14 million. How big a threat is this to startups and to the sector as a whole?
Yeah, okay. I think one of the major risk factors in the fintech industry is regulatory uncertainties. Obviously, regulation is required because the fintech industry is dealing with people's money and is an interface with individuals, users, and so on and so forth. And an important element in that is trust and regulatory oversight. So regulation is required. The extent of that requirement and how it is implemented is as important as the regulation itself. So, of course, we've seen CBN come up with different regulatory requirements. But so far, the regulatory framework that CBN has come up with so far is still relatively restricted to some form of fintech because the fintech industry is relatively wide. We have companies that are specialized in payments. There are companies that specialize in savings and investment. And there are some that are specialized in mobile money. And some are digital banking. So we have other regulators that also need to come up with their own regulatory framework, like the Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, especially for companies that are into investment or capital market operations generally. So I think there will be more clarity to the regulatory requirements overall. It is always like this everywhere in the world. The companies are always are always in the forefront of innovation, and then the regulators need to come up with regulatory requirement or framework to ensure that the industry is adequately taken care of, while the interests of the consumers are protected.
Okay, well, also your company, Kairos, made the Kairos K50 list in 2018. Can you tell us more about the competition and how you became the only African fintech company to make it to this list?
Oh, well, I think we felt it's a big privilege to be the only African company in that list. So the way Kairos 50 works is they'll scan through the world to look at companies that are solving
They scan through the what?
Through the world, across the world, to look for companies that are solving fundamental problems, fundamental problems that the masses actually face. So last year, they looked at more than 2,500 companies across the world, and fortunately, Kairos was one of those they picked, which is also a validation of the fact that, a validation of the problem we're solving here, which is primarily providing access to the mass market with respect to the division of financial services, specific and investment opportunities, and also making those services available in a more comfortable way and affordable way for the masses.
Okay, but what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that fintech companies face, and what are some of the opportunities there that are available to startups?
I mentioned one of those challenges earlier, which is regulatory uncertainties. As more clarity comes into light, there will be that risk would definitely get diluted. But aside the regulatory uncertainty, one other major factor that fintechs in Nigeria are facing is talent. Is becoming more competitive in the sense that even the global companies from across the world are looking at Nigeria in terms of sourcing talent, because talent is relatively cheap compared to what obtains, say, in Europe or US, for example. I mean tech talent right now. So Nigerian companies now need to compete with global peers to ensure that they retain talent. So every day, every week, every month, we have tech talent moving to Europe, moving to US, and of course, leaving the Nigerian shore. But of course, as more talent
So they're challenged with providing the kind of opportunities that are globally competitive.
So exactly. And of course, we have other companies as well that are helping in that in terms of developing local talent to fill some of these gaps that currently exist.
And so those opportunities for startups are?
Okay. I think the opportunities are enormous in terms of, let's just even look at the numbers. Banks have been around for more than a century in Nigeria, banking services. But of course, if you look at the tractions they've established, they've done a lot, but there's still more that needs to be done. The number of people who actually have access to full-fledged financial services today is quite limited. Of course, we have millions of people who have access to bank accounts, but Of course, we know that having access to bank accounts is not what financial inclusion all entails. That is just the first step. We have more than 70 million savings accounts in Nigeria today, but how many people actually have access to, say, investment opportunity? And a classic example of that is, in Nigeria today, there are about, say, 5.5 million CSCs, which is the space Kairos is actually playing in. Okay. And out of that 5.5 million accounts, we have just 1.5 million CSCs accounts that are linked to bank accounts. Of course, which means there are individuals who have 2 to 3, 4 CSCs accounts. But out of that 1.5 million, only 350,000 accounts are active, which means technically in Nigeria today, we can say just about 350,000 people are active investors, which is ridiculously low. And the reason for that is very simple. There has been challenges with respect to access. The traditional framework of allowing first wasn't built to scale. So an example is, I want to invest today, I have to send money to my investment manager's account. And the investment manager needs to check his bank account to reconcile that with his local system, which means if 10,000 people send money into that investment account, who will be there to check the individual transaction? So that system wasn't built to scale. So there is a huge opportunity to build a system that is scalable, that is profitable and sustainable, and that at the same time solves the fundamental problem of access that millions of people have out there.
Okay, but while we're talking about gaps and opportunities, to what extent should we expect FinTech and mobile telecommunication companies to cannibalize banking transactions in 2019?
So that has been a very hot debate, but frankly, I don't think it's an issue of cannibalization. I don't think it's
disruption, cannibalizing, whatever you want to call it.
No, I don't think it's a zero-sum game because there are opportunities out there. So it's about making the pie bigger, because the 40 million adult Nigerians out there would have never had any interface with financial service, for example. Give a lot of opportunity to add value, to create more value to the entire banking industry. That doesn't mean some sectors won't be cannibalized, but looking at it as a whole, I think it's a positive sum game. Okay,
and I think on the upside, one of the biggest opportunities there is collaborations. So in what ways will commercial banks collaborate with FinTech companies?
So we've seen a couple of trends developing in terms of possible collaboration with opportunities. So an example would be there are some financial institutions in Nigeria today that have like Tech Hub, which allows FinTech or other tech startups to be able to mature their ideas. Because a major problem for FinTech generally is that at the initial stage, the business model might not be that coherent. So there is need for you to have a platform that allows you to iterate very fast, have interface with customers, test the product, and ensure that you're able to change this product and features to ensure you have a product and business model that is sustainable. So there is need for that kind of platform that allows startups to be able to do that. And a couple of Nigerian banks are already doing that. There are other forms of collaboration which involves each party leveraging on each other's strengths. So banks, existing banks, of course, have their strengths. FinTechs have their strength in terms of speed of execution and elegance of the product they provide. So consumers like that. So the issue is how can that collaboration work such that banks play important role in allowing FinTechs to leverage the platform they already have to create additional value for customers. So creating hubs, allowing startups to ideate and iterate their ideas to ensure they develop and innovate sustainable business models, and collaborating with existing platforms to ensure that product gets to consumers faster are examples of collaborative opportunities that I see happening.
Okay, well now looking at the CBN's 2020 target of reducing the number of unbanked Nigerians to 20%, do you think that that is a realistic goal?
Well, we all have goals. I think it's a very noble objective, but looking at the timeline of 2020, I don't think that's achievable.
Why?
The gap is huge, and there is a lot that needs to go into moving very fast to ensure that that gap is bridged. So, for example, the regulatory uncertainty might actually be a major deterrent to attracting additional investments in that sector. So last year, for example, more than $200 million flew into the sector. And about 50 million of that was into Nigeria. So if there are a lot of regulatory uncertainties that could hinder the development of fintech, which is an important element to ensure that a lot more people get into the bracket of being included financially, then 1 year is just too short for that milestone to be achieved. That doesn't mean there won't be a lot of traction between now and then, but I really don't see us moving from, say, 40% financially excluded to 20% financially excluded in just 1 year.
So what's a more realistic percentage?
I think we'll get to probably 35.
Okay.
35%, meaning that we might likely reduce the financially excluded by about 10 percentage points from the current 45%. That might be a very good realistic objective to look at.
Okay, but what roles do you think that fintech startups will play? What roles will fintech startups like Kairos play, rather, in engaging unbanked Nigerians and, of course, improving the financial inclusion for people, say, in rural areas?
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that there are a couple of fintechs. The space is relatively big, each company playing specific role. And there are key value propositions that fintechs bring on the table. And one of those key value propositions is platforms that allows access, ease of access. That's very important, meaning that how do I get onboarded to be part of the financial service industry, for example? Do I need to take a week to fill forms to do that, or I can just do that in, say, 2-3 minutes? Fintechs allow that to happen. So that's, in its own, it's a way of breaking down the entry barrier for a lot more people to take part. Then second part is affordability.
Okay.
So traditionally, for example, in investment management, we have companies that have minimum capital requirements. Say, for example, you need 3, 4, 5 million before you can be regarded customer, right? But with relatively scalable, you can actually just throw the platform out for a lot more people without regards to minimum capital requirements.
Okay.
So in Kairos, for example, with as little as 100 naira, you can start saving and investing.
Really?
Yeah, which is fantastic, which means we've broken down that barrier of access, which probably takes 1 week, 2 weeks before you can complete account, and looking for 2-3 million before you can start having access to professionally managed investment opportunities. So those opportunities are what fintechs are bringing to the table, and they can actually fast track the rate at which millions of people get financially included.
Razaq, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
I've been talking to the Managing Director of Kairos, Mr. Razaq Ahmed. Now that's it for this edition of the Global Business Report. Please keep it here on Arise News.